Jeff Wetzler, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. I'm so excited that you're here today.
Thank you, DJ. It's great to be with you.
I love your book. You have a topic that hits home for me, something that I'm very passionate about, which is being curious and asking questions. I think that's one reason why I'm probably in the seat I am as a podcaster. I just get a
Yes.
joy out of asking questions. And so your book, phenomenal. What I love about it is it's not just theory, there's also strategies and practice behind it. We're going to go through some of those momentarily. But before we do, I wanted to start with the quote that you open up your book with. I haven't heard this before. I think it's a great place to start. The quote goes like this: "Who is wise? One who learns from every person. As it is said, from all who taught me, I have gained understanding." What does this quote mean to you, and why'd you start your book with it?
So I love the quote. It is deeply personal to me. It comes from my own faith tradition, and it also, to me, in some ways, sums up the entirety of the book in one short quote. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if we want to get things done, we need to be wiser. If we want to make smart decisions, if we want to collaborate, if we want to live a good life, all of that comes down to wisdom. And I think to me, the quote turns wisdom on its head. Wisdom is not about having all the answers. Wisdom is about knowing that I need to seek the answers out, and seeing that every single person around us can be a teacher. Every single person around us has lived a life that we have not lived, which means they have a whole set of ideas and insights and experiences and perspectives that we have not yet gotten access to. And there is something in every single person's story, that I think would change us for the better.
I love that idea. I've never heard of it that way, Jeff, is that wisdom is not having all the information. Perhaps it's being able to find ways to seek it out and ask the right questions to get there. I'm such a believer that everybody on this earth has something to teach us. It's
I
just
totally
up to
agree.
us whether we are open to hearing it or not. So to,
Yes.
to me, a lot of this is very obvious to me, right? I see the importance of it. To me, it's like stay curious. It's a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
But for some people, it's like it's hard. And so what I want to do is have some empathy today for some of the people that maybe struggle with curiosity and struggle with asking questions. So let me just ask kind of a point blank question here. Why do you think why do some people struggle with this? And maybe point blank, why don't people ask questions?
Yes. Um, this is the heart of what I'm obsessed with. And so when somebody like you comes along and says that they believe in staying curious, I'm like, you're speaking my love language. Now I want to ask you 1,000 questions about how come that's important to you. So maybe I'll get a chance to do that later. But what makes it hard? Why do people not ask questions? I think it's so many different things. Let's start with, people don't ask questions because they're not curious. How come people are not curious? It's not because they started that way. We all started insanely curious. We all asked hundreds and hundreds of questions per day as a kid, to the point where our parents said, "Stop asking so many questions." And that's one of the reasons why we got less curious, because it kind of got socialized out of us. And then we started going to school. And in school, they didn't say, "That's amazing. What other questions do you have?" They said, "Sit down and shut up and give me the answers to my questions and give me the singular right answer to my questions." And so all of a sudden, these beings that we started as, total curiosity machines, you can just see that curiosity light dim and dim and dim and dim and dim, to the point where we walk around without a lot of curiosity. And then our brains develop a set of biases and beliefs and assumptions and life stories that we all walk around with. I just refer to that as our stuff. And anytime we walk into a situation, we basically size up that situation through the lens of our stuff. And so we select bits of little slices of the situation that confirm the stuff that we have that we already walked in with. We interpret it in ways consistent with our stuff. We reach conclusions and tell ourselves stories that match the pre-existing beliefs that we have. And those stories then serve to reconfirm our stuff, because we say, "Oh, there they are. They're doing it again. Here they go again." And they're always like this. And when that happens, we get stuck in what I call the certainty loop, where essentially, our stuff influences our stories and our stories reconfirm our stuff. And there's nothing to be curious about. And so I think most of us walk around the world, whether we know it or not, stuck in our certainty loops. And when you're certain, then let's literally there's nothing to ask a question about because you kind of know how this person is, and you kind of know what this situation's going to be about and what's going to happen and all that kind of stuff. So I would say for my first answer to your question about why don't people ask enough questions or a lot of questions is that they aren't curious for all the reasons I just said. And then I'll just say a second reason, which is that despite the fact that we were born curious and born asking questions, there is an art and a skill to asking questions. And it is not something that we're taught. Um, there are not classes or courses in school on how to ask questions, what makes for a good question, what makes for a better question or a worse question. There's not classes in the workplace. People aren't typically trained in that. And so it shouldn't really come as a surprise to us that we aren't asking a lot of good questions because, people teach us all kinds of other skills. We learn technical skills, we learn presentation skills, we learn public speaking skills. Sometimes we might even learn conflict resolution skills, whatever. We're not really taught a lot of skills about how to ask questions, but it turns out that there are skills and they can be taught. And so that was one of the big motivators for me in writing the book.
I can't wait to get into some of those skills as we get on with this conversation. So what I'm hearing is kind of the main theme here is that some of it comes back to school. And in school, as we're growing up, we're rewarded when we have a right answer. And
That's right.
sometimes it's actually the opposite when you have a question. Sometimes the teacher's like, oh, or maybe you have to go to a different classroom or we get punished because we have the question. So really, it starts from very, very early on of how are we providing an environment? And we'll talk about creating a safe environment. What are some of your ideas on if we really wanted to get to the root cause of this, Jeff, which sounds like it's from early on? What does that look like if we wanted to start rewarding curiosity instead of just rewarding the right answer? Is that even possible? What are your thoughts on that?
I do think it's possible. I think we need a different model of education and schooling. So most schools in this country operate on what we call the industrial model of schooling. And the industrial model of schooling is basically meant to just kind of stamp out human beings just the same way you would stamp out something that's going through an assembly line in a factory. That which by the way is not trying to look for its uniqueness or its jagged edges. It's trying to standardize everything. But there's different ways to do school. I have co-founded an organization called Transcend that literally helps communities reimagine what school is, specifically to help young people go after their passions and to pursue their curiosity. And so it starts by noticing a kid's interest. As a parent, you can do that to say, what does my kid really know? Like, what do they seem to light up about? When do I see the twinkle in their eyes? What do they ask about? What do they talk about? And then how can I just kind of fuel the flames of that? Maybe I can feed them another book or give them an experience or something like that and continue to nourish that passion. I did that with my own son who expressed a lot of interest early on in computers and coding. And so I was constantly just trying to expose him to this or introduce him to this person or that type of stuff can keep the flame alive of curiosity. But one of my favorite quotes about kids comes from James Baldwin, who said, "Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them." And so if we want our kids to be curious and ask questions, we should role model that for them. When something comes up that we don't know about, we should say, "Wow, fascinating. I have no idea. How might we find the answer to that?" We should admit when we need to learn something ourselves. We should show them what it looks like to be curious and ask questions. And as James Baldwin, predicts, they will imitate us because they will see that that's rewarded. And when they ask us questions, and when they ask us, the 11th or the 1100th question, we should not shut it down, but rather we should say, "So interesting. How could we look into that? What makes you ask that question?" All those kinds of things are things that parents and teachers can do, help keep the flame of curiosity alive.
I think one other potential barrier for people that maybe don't ask questions is that they might think or have the assumption that it slows things down. And how I see
Yeah.
it, Jeff, I see it like a slingshot. Yes, it's going to slow things down for a moment, but then you're able to go so much farther when we let go of that slingshot. So talk to
Oh,
me
I
a little bit
love that
about
metaphor. I love that
yeah,
so much.
thanks. It literally just came to me. Talk to me about the people who maybe think that it's more of a patience thing, or it's more like, I'm trying to go fast. I'm trying to go, go, go. I got a lot going on. I got Zoom call after Zoom call. I don't have time. time to slow down and ask these questions. What would you say to somebody like that? Because I think that is a large majority of people.
Well, one of my mentors told me, there's the pay now or pay later plan. And so, yes, it might take an extra few minutes to pause, get curious, ask a question, but think about how much time you waste by making the wrong decision because you don't know what the fatal flaw is in your plan that someone else might have seen that that they could have pointed out if only you had gotten that question. Think about how much time you waste in, let's just say, employee turnover when you don't realize some of the source of someone's dissatisfaction and then they leave and then you need to, as opposed to just getting curious, what's your experience going? Think about a coach who needs to, motivate an athlete. And when they don't realize really what's going on in the life of that athlete, and then they just push them because that seems like the most fast and efficient thing to do. And that athlete gets burned out or that athlete, it messes up. So to me, it's a matter of invest it now and you will save so much time later.
Let's get into the ask approach. This is what the genesis of the book is about here. Before we dive into the specific kind of 5 steps, is there anything you want to kind of declare before we get into the nuances of maybe how you got there, or what do we need to know before we dive into step 1?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say one of the biggest motivators for me in developing the ask approach was this observation that the people around us hold insights, ideas, perspectives that if we could find out would be so valuable for us together. We would make better decisions together. We would have better relationships. We would save time together. We would win together, all those different kinds of things. But so often they don't tell us and we don't find out what they really think, feel, and know. And so we suffer. And so that, the reason I go here is to say there's a problem that the ask approach is solving, and this is the problem. And it's a particularly tricky problem because most of us don't realize we have the problem because we don't know what we don't know. We don't realize that the people around us have this vital stuff because they're not telling us what it is. They're not saying, "Hey, I know something really important that you should find out, and I'm not going to tell you." They just don't tell you. And so we're blind to the fact that we're blind about this in some ways. And it wouldn't be a problem if we could accurately read their minds. So if we could accurately predict what someone else was thinking, feeling, and knowing, you wouldn't need to read this book. But it turns out that as human beings, research shows we're really bad at this. And the conventional wisdom that gives us tips on how to do this turns out is really bad too. Like people will say, try to read their body language. It doesn't work. You can't actually read people's body language and know what they're really thinking and feeling. Even TSA agents in the airport who are trained to read body language are barely better than chance in terms of their accurate guesses of what's going on. We also get the advice, try to put yourself in their shoes. But putting yourself in someone's shoes is kind of impossible because we're not in their shoes. And it's so much guesswork. And so when people try to do that, they also don't do it. It turns out that research shows there's only one thing that reliably enables us to know what other people think and feel, which is to ask them. But coming back to what we said earlier, it's easier said than done. We're not taught how to do that. And so the ask approach is really a research-backed, practice-tested set of strategies or set of practices or steps that we can take to maximize the chances that we really find out what someone else thinks, feels, and knows.
I love it. Great setup. Let's go right in. The first one is obviously my favorite one, being the byline of the show, to stay curious. So the first step is to choose curiosity. We teased this already a little bit, but talk to me a little bit. Let's open it up broad, and then we'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper because I'm sure we're going to go back and forth on one of our favorite subjects here. But why is that number one?
Yeah, everything stems from curiosity. If you are not curious and you try to force yourself to ask someone a question, they will see right through it. It will come off as inauthentic and you're not going to learn anything from that person. But conversely, if you're genuinely curious, if you really, really want to know and learn from someone else, you kind of radiate an energy that they can't help but want to share with you as well. A mentor of mine, Diana Smith, always uses this expression: the desire to know cultivates the willingness to tell. And so when someone can really tell that I desire to learn from them and know, they want to tell me more. And I believe that curiosity is not just a trait that some people have and other people lack. And I also don't believe it's just kind of a mood or a state of mind that we're in and nothing we can do about it. I truly believe it's a choice, which means that it's always available to us. It's a decision that we can decide, that we can choose to make at any point in time. And when we make that choice, we're asking ourselves one single and simple question, which is, what can I learn from this person? Um, and when we show up with someone, whether it's, somebody at a business meeting or a family member or a coach or whatever it is, with that mindset, what can I learn from this person? All of a sudden, it pushes away other questions like, how do I get them to do what I want them to do? Or why are they so stupid? Or, how do I get out of here? Or anything like that. And instead, it invites other questions to come into our minds like, what do they see that I don't see? What's their take on the situation? What's the internal experience that they're having? How might I be impacting them? And so choosing curiosity is really about setting that intention when I'm sitting down with someone to say that this is about learning from them, which doesn't mean I have to agree with them. It doesn't mean I have to do everything that they want me to do, but it does mean I really want to understand their experience, their thoughts, their feelings, their knowledge, their point of view on a situation.
So the question is, what can I learn from them when you're maybe across the table from somebody? Jeff, what does it look like to awaken our own curiosity, perhaps when it comes to hobbies or what I like to do? Maybe it's more about me and this curiosity. How can my listeners awaken their curiosity for themselves, not just about other people, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best ways to awaken your own curiosity is to shake yourself out of your daily habits and routines. So if you try something new, you want to learn something new, put yourself in a situation where you're a novice, try a new sport, try dancing if you've never done that, try what a garden, whatever it is, but surround yourself with people who are different than the people that you might normally surround yourself with, especially surround yourself with people who believe things that might be different than what you believe, who talk differently than you, who hang out with the people that are differently than you, and and do activities that you've never done before. All of that stuff, research shows, kind of shakes us out of the certainty loop because the stuff that we carry around with us doesn't serve to accurately predict what the new situation is going to be like because we don't have those mental models for those new situations. That brings us back to more like the childlike state.
So being in something new, new routines, new people, that helps to push through to the curiosity. I'm curious then, what are some of the things that you talk about curiosity killers? I would say the opposite would obviously be mundane routines, doing the same things, talking to the same people. Are there any other
Yes,
things that are big curiosity killers that we should be aware of?
absolutely. Um, uh, I'll just name two others. One is emotional hijacking. So when we get really worked up, we're pissed off about something, we are hurt by someone, we're feeling really angry or jealous or whatever it is. The curious part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex part of our brain, basically falls prey to the reptile part of our brain, which is the emotional part of our brain. And so we have to be really aware when that's happening. One of the things that I offer, which takes some practice. So it's not like, all of a sudden you're going to flip the switch, but it can really work, is if you can turn it on its head and basically say, can you use your strong emotions as a cue or a reminder to yourself, hey, this is a moment when I actually really need to lean into curiosity. So there's an expression I learned from Kim Scott, who wrote the great book Radical Candor, and the expression is, when you're furious, get curious. And it's just like so it's almost like now we have an extra reminder. It's almost like that rubber band on the door that reminds us to unload the dishwasher or whatever else. We can use our own emotions as reminders to say, this is the moment when I actually most need to get curious. It can help to invite other people in your life to prompt you. So it's like saying to them, hey, I want to be doing this. So next time you see me get worked up, can you say, hey, just, this is, you said you want to get curious right now. How about try that right now? I do that with some of my colleagues at work, and it helps a lot. And it also can help, I know a lot of athletes and others use breathing techniques. And so if we can use some breathing techniques just to put a little space between the emotional reaction and what comes next, inside that space, we can also remind ourselves to get curious.
Man, you're speaking exactly my language. So in my book, I say the same thing, get curious, not furious. And what I'm teaching student athletes as well, or traveling across the country on this stuff is the curiosity gives you a moment of pause, right? So hey,
Yes.
a bad call happens, umpire calls a strike, you thought it was a ball. The curiosity gives you a moment to reflect and think to yourself, okay, what can I control here? What's the situation? And when you're able to step away and get curious and ask those questions, not only does it down regulate you, but it also gives you a chance to pause. And we know more often than not when we have personal fouls, technical fouls, whatever it is, it's because there's no pause. We have a reaction instead of a response. And so the difference there is being able to have a deliberate pause in between. So I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's spot on.
Yeah, totally. And I would say that I think the coach athlete relationship is a prime relationship where curiosity can get killed, but also where curiosity can make a difference.
I'll say more about
Um,
that.
well, so let's say you're a coach and the athlete that you're coaching is not doing what you want them to do. And that could be as simple as like, in the moment, their body's not doing the thing you want them to do, or they're not leaning into practice the way you want them to. They don't seem like they're disciplined, whatever it may be. I think the natural response can be to let me motivate them. Let me push them a little harder. Let me give them a little reinforcement. Let me give them a correction. Sometimes that's the right thing to do, but if that's not working, or if you see a persistent pattern, I would argue the better thing to do is to start to get curious. What might be going on for them that's causing that? What might be the story they're telling themselves that actually inside their story is making their choices the right choices for them to make? What's the emotional experience that they're having? And also, by the way, what's the experience that they are having of you as a coach? And how might your coaching also be playing into their response in ways that you don't actually realize or see? And so you could also flip that and apply that to the athlete. If your coach is not doing the things that you find helpful or want, rather than avoiding them or pushing back on them or whatever else, try to get curious. What does the world look like from their perspective as well? And you can't, as I said before, you can't actually accurately guess till you talk about it. We'll get to that. But starting with that curiosity, I think, can be so high leverage in that situation.
I think it also too, it loosens the grip a little bit, right? Like we're
Yeah,
so tight on things, and when you take a question approach, and if we're still speaking from that sports lens, it kind of just loosens your grip a little bit, and you go from that furious to curious by asking questions because it's really hard to be furious and ask questions. It just doesn't work that way. So it kind of
yeah,
just loosens it. What do you think about that?
100% agree. Yeah. When I talk about this question of what can I learn from this person, pushing out other questions, I think it speaks to exactly what you're saying, which is there's no room for curiosity and furiousness, if that's a word, literally to coexist in them. I don't think they can coexist exactly in the same mind as well. So I love that.
Andrew Huberman talked about curiosity in one of his recent podcasts. It was so cool. He said that curiosity significantly ramps up level of neural activity in human brain circuits that releases dopamine, which in turn allows deeper, more stable learning, not just of the
Yes,
thing we are curious about, but also the information and the events preceded it. This makes curiosity one of the most potent dopamine promoting neuroplasticity and learning tools available. He went on to say that people are constantly looking for ways to raise their brain dopamine level. So, one reasonable answer is to engage in curiosity.
totally, totally agree. I totally agree.
Another part of it that I thought was super interesting was he was talking about Esther Perel, who is one of the world's leading experts on relationships. I'm not sure if you
Yeah,
caught this or not, but he said that she says that one of the most sustaining factors for romantic relationships over long periods of time, keep in mind this is her field, this is what she does. The key there is a sense of curiosity, both about the other person, but also about oneself and how you'll change in the context of the relationship. You talk about, I love this, I underline in your book, curiosity creates connection. When you're asking questions, you're creating a connection. So I'm parlaying what you're saying over to the best in the business of Esther Perel saying the number one key to long-lasting romantic relationships is curiosity. It's amazing.
yeah, yeah. If you take the word curious and take it all the way back to where it comes from, the Latin root of curious means to care. And so when you're curious about someone, you're showing that you care about them. And I think caring about each other is at the heart of relationships. And I know when, when I'm sitting down with someone or out at a party or meal and someone asks me a lot of questions, I feel cared about.
Totally.
And conversely, when someone kind of talks about themselves the whole time and doesn't ask a single question, I don't think they care about me.
Totally.
And so I think it's deeply related to relationships.
You and I are so similar, Jeff. This is awesome. For the before we go to number two, what I'm thinking about the person who is, man, I'm a little bit more of an introvert. I have a hard time with this. What are some of kind of like low hanging fruit, Jeff? I'm going to a dinner party and I want to be more curious. What are a couple questions that I could lean on to be more curious? What are some go-tos?
Yeah. So these are questions. Are you saying these are questions to ask the other person or questions to ask yourself?
We can go either one.
Yeah. So to ask yourself, it would be to show up. What can I learn from this person? What might I be missing? What do they know that I don't know? What do they see that I don't see? How are they experiencing things? And then questions to actually ask them. I was just today at a lunch with someone who I was just beginning to get to know. And the question that she asked me, and the same was the exact same question I wanted to ask her, which is just like, what's your story? What's the story of how you ended up here? And ended up here doesn't have to mean just professionally, like how you ended up literally at this place at this moment, how you ended up at this station in life, how you ended up with your life partner, whatever it is. But the question of just tell me the story, and then starting to pull on that thread, I think just opens up so much.
Great. Let's go to number two, make it safe. So the first, we're talking about the ask approach. We have 5 steps. The first one is choose curiosity, both of our favorite words. Second one is make it safe. Jeff, my question for you is how can we make it easier for my listeners, specifically coaches and parents out there, to have their students and their student athletes be able to tell them hard things? I think sometimes kids kind of swallow it and they don't want to talk about it. So how can we make a safe environment for kids and student athletes to be able to speak up on the hard things?
Yeah. So a few things. Um, One is it has to start with a foundation of connection. And so if you want to have a kid tell you really what's going on with them, um, it is you got to invest in that relationship and trust before the moment that really matters. They've got to have a foundation of relationship with you. And then when it comes time to actually having, a tough conversation or an important conversation in the moment, where and when and how you make that connection really matters as well. So just to take my own 16-year-old daughter as an example, she when she comes home from school and I want to know how she's doing or what's going on for her, especially if it looks like she had a bad day, and I ask her, I get nothing. I get absolutely nothing. I don't want to talk about it, Dad. Whatever. If I ask her at dinner, usually nothing as well. When I get it is when she wants to talk about it, which is usually 11 p.m. after her homework is done, after she's talked to her friends, when I'm like ready to be in bed and asleep. But that's when she wants to share. And that's when it all comes out and it comes spilling out. And so if I want to really get the real experience that she's having, I got to do it on her terms. I do find also sometimes I get it when we're driving in the car and we're not looking face to face at each other. There's something about sort of like taking a walk or being in a car together that is a little bit, sort of like less confronting. And so thinking very intentionally about the time and space and place. And you could assume, if you're a coach or you're a parent and you ask your kid a question, you get an answer. Don't assume that's the full answer. You may not have yet made it safe. So that's one strategy is around like when and how to invest in creating that connection. Another thing is just if we want kids to open up or anyone to open up, we need to open up first. And so it's not enough to just say to them, "Hey, tell me what's going on. Why aren't you doing it?" Whatever. Talk about why you're asking the question. Talk about what you are struggling with. Talk about what it means to you. The more vulnerable your sharing can be, the more that the other person is going to feel safe sharing with you. If you're a coach and you struggled with anxiety or the yips or any number of other things, let them in on that. Because when they see that level of your humanity, they're going to know that you're less likely to judge them for theirs as well. And then I'll just say one last thing, which is I call it radiating resilience, which is basically saying to the kid, I can handle your truth, whatever it is. If you're feeling frustrated, if you want to quit, whatever it is, I just want to know what you're really going through, what you're really experiencing. I'm not going to crumble. I'm not going to fly off the handle. I'm not going to take it out on you. I'm not going to blame you. The more that an athlete, a kid, whoever senses that we can handle their truth, the safer they're going to feel telling us that truth. There's some really interesting research I talk about in the book that I did with talking with child psychologists who basically say that when parents of adolescents hear something from the adolescent, one of the biggest determinants of whether the adolescent will continue to tell them important things is how the parent reacts. If you react strongly, negatively, or actually even positively, the kid is going to be less likely to tell you things than if you have a relatively sort of like neutral receptive and you kind of modulate your reactivity. In the business world, I talk to CEOs and they say they're very conscious of their facial expressions because people read so much into a CEO's facial expression. Same thing is true that kids read into their parents or their coach's facial expressions. So, watch your face so that you can also kind of radiate resilience that way too.
It's so interesting that you say that and say neutral. The reason being, we have a brand new baby girl here. She's 9 months old, and so
Congratulations.
yeah, thanks. My wife and I are always going back and forth on reels and educating each other on some of the parent stuff that's on Instagram. Some of it's phenomenal, and one of the
Yeah.
things literally she just sent me this morning. I thought this was fascinating. It's a unique one, but what do you do when the first time when your baby hits you and it's just like a slap across the face because they don't, they're 9 months old, they don't know what they're doing, and the reel was interesting because it said every time you give a reaction, they're going to do it again because they're giving you some sort of a reaction. Again, this is playful.
Yeah.
I'm not talking violent, but
Yeah.
if the kid
Yeah.
hits you in the face and so instead, right, the reaction, the video was you kind of have this frown. You're like, nope, we don't do that. And what do? They go do it again. And so in the message in this video that obviously we didn't talk about before this conversation was not to have a reaction at all and just be
Yeah.
neutral about it. And that's going to diminish the chances of them doing it again. So what you're saying right here, I think correlates exactly to what I saw on Instagram.
Fascinating. And of course, I'm not saying, be inauthentic. And if you
Totally.
haven't, don't hold back, but be mindful of the ways in which your reactions might accidentally send messages to kids that could stop them from sharing in the future.
Because it's one bad look or one bad reaction and they'll never open up ever again.
Exactly. That's right.
So three pieces to make it safe here. First, create connection. Something else I hear from you is timing. Be smart about the
Yep.
timing.
That's part of yep.
Open up yourself and then radiate resilience by letting them know, hey, I can handle whatever it is that you have for me today. Let's go to the next one. So choose curiosity is 1, 2 is make it safe, 3 is pose quality questions. I showed you my shirt that I sell before this that says ask better questions. So let me ask you, Jeff, what are some of the best questions to tap into people's wisdom?
Yeah. So in the book, I distinguish between quality questions and what I call crummy questions. And I define quality questions very simply as questions that help us learn something important from someone else. And I think so many of us walk around thinking we're asking good questions when we're really asking crummy questions. And crummy questions meaning that the other person's not going to actually tell us the truth based on those questions. The crummy questions could be, for example, a good example of a crummy question is, let's say a coach is trying to give a correction or change something that someone does. They explain it all, and then they say, "So does that make sense?" They might be thinking, "I want to know, does it really make sense to the person?" It's very unlikely someone's going to say, "No, it doesn't make sense," or "Here's what I'm struggling with," etc. Instead, if you ask a question like, "So how does that sit with you? What does that make you think? What are your reactions to that? What would be hard for you about that? What might be off about that advice?" Any number of those questions invites so much more the other person to actually tell you what's going on for them than a question like, "Does that make sense?"
So I think
In the
a lot
book,
of it,
I talk. Yeah,
oh yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Please.
I was just gonna say, I think one thing is like, getting away from yes, no, and opening it up. The one that came to my mind, Jeff, when you were talking was instead of do you have any questions, it's what questions do you have?
Yes,
And providing that kind of
have?
that open platform. So, as a podcaster too, that's what I've learned is obviously staying away from that yes, no. And it's not just in an interview type format like we're in right now, but that can be anywhere. So that's just what I was gonna throw in. What were you gonna say?
Well, just to stick with that for a second. So going from "Do you have any questions?" to "What questions do you have?" I think is a shift from a crummy question to a more quality question. And if I were to take it one step further, Because what questions do you have could still leave some people feeling stupid for having questions or feeling like it's on them to have questions. And so I've sometimes gone to, what questions does this raise for you? And so the cause of you having questions is not on you that you have these questions, but more like this is raising some questions for you. And so to me, it's really powerful just to think about how very small tweaks in the design of a question can have radical impacts in terms of how much someone is or isn't willing to share and what you actually learn from the question. Um, in the chapter, I kind of share a taxonomy of about a dozen quality question strategies, just like request reactions is one of those. And when I've gone around and talked about ask and taught about ask, the single most common thing I get from people is, can I have a printout of those 12 quality question strategies? Because they're very learnable and they're very concrete and they're easy to take away. And people want to just have them kind of as a reference. So a few others include strategies that I call dig deeper. So if someone tells you, hey, here's my opinion, or here's my position, or I don't want to do something like that, rather than saying, okay, got it, or pushing back or fighting back, dig a little deeper and say, tell me more where that comes from and what leads you to get to that, and what are your reasons, what are your concerns, what are your interests, what's that starting to solve for? Any number of those things kind of starts to get below the surface, and usually it's what's below the surface that's more important and more interesting than their headline. And one of the ways to dig deeper I call see what they see, which is to say, hey, can you give me some examples? Can you tell me a story about what that was like? So the deeper you can go, the more you can pull for information, experiences, stories. Now you're starting to really get a rich picture of what's going on for someone. So those are a couple other examples of quality question strategies.
So for those folks out there that want that printout, can you go through a couple of those again, just so we can nail those in? What are some of those 12 that you're talking about? Just reiterate them one more time.
Absolutely. And I will also say you can get the printout on my website, which is askapproach.com. But we talked about request reactions. One that I alluded to, it starts with hear their headline, which is just sometimes people actually don't tell you their headline. So it can be like, hey, what do you think about this? What's your position on this? Where do you land on this? Where do you come down on this? Those are all how to hear their headline. Dig deeper, see what they see. And then there's other ones that also include like invite ideas. How might you think about this? If you were in my shoes, how would you be thinking about this? What would you be doing differently? Things like that. Requesting feedback, not by saying, "Do you have any feedback for me?" but more, "What's one thing I could be doing better?" Is another example of a quality question strategy.
I love this. I love the idea of quality questions. It's something I'm truly obsessed with, and I think that's why, again, I'm in this position that I'm in with being a podcaster. But it truly changes honestly, I think it changes the quality of your life. I think the
Yeah.
quality of your questions determine the quality of your life, along with other things like relationships and etc. And I don't mean to dramatize this, make this a bigger deal, but it really is. And once you start kind of reframing the way you ask questions, I say this because now I'm on the other side and I see things differently. I have different types of conversations, higher level conversations with people because I'm able to tease out better questions. So that's why I bring you on. That's why I have these conversations, because it's a huge deal. It can change your life if you really think about, how do I ask the right question? And I'm still getting better at it. There's every episode I'm getting better. Every conversation is a chance for me to practice, of course. But once you can start really thinking about how you ask questions and raising up your level, it will change your life.
I 100% agree. One of the people who wrote the endorsement for the book, Parker Palmer, who's also a Minnesotan, said, this book points the way to a larger life. And I say that not to say anything about the book, but just to say that when you ask better questions, you learn things that just open up your world in a fundamental way. And to me, the good news is that this is not a mystery. It's not like there's 157 question strategies. Like, there are about a dozen. You can learn about a dozen of things, and it's pretty spelled out, and it's pretty concrete, and you can practice one at a time until you build that into your repertoire. Then you can add the next one in, and you can add the next one in, and pretty soon you've got a much broader array of questions to pull from.
I think too that there's a quote out there, I'll probably butcher it, but it's something along the lines, Jeff, of like, the more interested you are in other people, the more interesting you become.
Yes.
Something like that, where
Yes.
it's
I've
like,
heard
hey
a
man,
version of that too.
yeah, so I
Yeah.
probably butchered the heck out of it, but it's like, hey, the more I'm interested and curious about other people, the more people are like, who the heck's this guy? You know, you spend the hour at the party and all you do is ask questions, which is kind of what I do. And then
Yeah.
people are kind of like, wait a second, like, who's this dude? I didn't even get a chance to know. And you become this like everybody's interested in the guy who's asking questions. I think it's kind of funny how it turns out that way.
And it's, just on that topic, researchers have done some pretty kind of fun research on looking at speed dating. And that it turns out that the more questions you ask to a date, it's the number one predictor of how attractive people see you as. So you could be the exact same person, and if
Wow.
you don't ask questions versus you ask questions, you're going to be perceived as more physically attractive just by asking questions. It's also the number one predictor of getting a second date on speed dating as
Wow.
well. So even if all you want to do is look good and get another date, just ask questions.
Man, I think that we're hitting this home, man. If you get through this episode and you're like, no, it's not for me, I don't know what to tell you because we got Andrew Huberman saying that it's a dopamine release. We got Esther Perel saying it's the key for long lasting relationships. We got Jeff Wetzler saying it's going to get you a second date. I don't know what else to tell you, man. Let's go to number 4.
Exactly.
Number
Exactly.
4 is listen to learn. So a key part of this is not just asking the question, but also being a good listener. And I think everybody that's listening goes, yeah, I'm a good listener. Everybody thinks they're a good listener. How can we, Jeff, how can we hear what someone is really trying to tell us?
Yeah, it's so funny when I work with groups, I say to people, what percentage of people in your life do you think are good listeners? And it's, 20%, 30%, maybe up to 40%. And then you look at the research, it's like 96% of people think that they're good listeners. So there is a big disconnect going on here. And at the end of the day, it doesn't even actually matter if you ask questions if you're not listening to the answers, and you're not actually hearing the answers. And so listen to learn is just as vital as asking the right questions. In the book, I talk about how important it is to not just listen for the content of what someone says, but also for the emotion that they're expressing and displaying, and also the actions that they're taking. So are they pushing back? Are they asking for help? Are they offering help? Are they expressing support for a point of view? Those are different kinds of actions. And so if you listen for content, emotion, and action, you essentially triple the amount of information you hear from someone. And it's kind of like the way someone who's really good at music might be able to listen to a piece and hear the drums and hear the vocals and hear the guitar and hear all the different things and the bass, whereas most of us just hear music. And so and they've trained their ear, and we can train our ears to listen for content and emotion and action. And when I work with groups, I will play a clip, just for, actually one of my favorite clips to play is from Ted Lasso. It's like a coaching conversation. And I say, first of all, just listen for the content. What is being said here? What's the information? What's the argument? Then I say, put that aside. Now just listen for what's the emotion that's being expressed. Put that aside. Now just listen for what are they doing in the conversation. All of a sudden you look at this sheet of paper and you've got like 3 long lists of things, whereas normally you might just hear one of those things as well. And so training ourselves to listen for those things really matters. And then in this chapter of the book, I talk about how do you train yourself to do that. And I'll just share one of the most powerful strategies that is underutilized is just what I call paraphrase and check. And that's just simply once someone tells you something, before you respond, before you move on, just say, hey, let me just say, this is what I think I heard you say. Did I get that right? So is that what you're saying? It is so powerful. Very few people use it. But when you do it, it has 3 magic benefits. The first is you actually get better information because you will clarify if you misunderstood them. Half the time when I do it, people say to me, well, that's actually not really what I meant to say. Or I did say that, but actually now that you say it back to me, it's something else or whatever. So you learn more. 2 is, to your point earlier, you can slow things down because oftentimes there's like, it's almost like a tennis match back and forth and back and forth. But instead of hitting your shot back, you're pausing and saying, wait, let me just check if I got your shot right. And so that changes the pace. It creates a little more space in the conversation. And the third is it sends a message to the other person that you care about them, that you care enough about really understanding where they're coming from to use your time and your breath and your words to check if you got them right. And so it is, if you take away nothing else from this entire podcast episode, and you start just paraphrasing and checking, did I understand you before you move on? It will make a huge difference.
One of my favorite ways to do it. I've had Chris Voss on the podcast a couple times. Had a
Uh-huh.
chance to go out to. Are you familiar with Chris?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, phenomenal human being. Had a chance to go out to and have dinner with him in Vegas with my dad a couple times. And one of the things he
Nice.
talks about is mirroring. And so it's
Yeah.
basically the last one, two, or three words of somebody's sentence. And it's just repeating back to this. So, man, I had a crummy day. I can't believe that happened. You're like, that happened? And you just kind of keep playing this back and forth game. And sometimes it's kind of a fun game to play. So for listeners out there, if this is new information for you, it's repeating the last one, two, or three words of somebody's sentence and watch. You could do that for 10, 15 minutes without them even knowing it. And it just gets them, it really gets them to open up. I mean, at some
Right.
point, you should probably try to insert some sort of an opinion. But I think it's a great way also. I think it's kind of what you're talking about too, Jeff, as well as like paraphrasing, mirroring, something that gets it going back into their direction. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's helpful to say back what you think you heard or the last few words and then check. And so is that what you're saying? Is that what you mean? Is that what you're thinking? That often helps you know the most in terms of what someone's saying. When I do that, one of my favorite games I like to play with myself is I try to get them to say, I try to do it. I try to be able to paraphrase what they say so well that they say to me, exactly. And I know when they say exactly, it's like, boom, I can score a point, not in a point against them, but it's like they feel so understood. They feel so like that you get them. They can't help but say exactly. And so if I'm in a conversation, I can get a couple exactlies. I know I'm doing the right thing.
And when you do that, you create just immediate connection. So Chris talks about
Immediate
that same
connection.
thing. His
Yeah.
words are "that's right." He's always trying to get to the "that's right" moment. And so for
Yeah.
him, it's the same thing as you, but you paraphrase and they go "that's right." You're like, "Bam, I'm right there with you." So I think that's a good one. Another piece of the listen and learn I think is really cool. You say ditch the distractions, zip your lip, watch your
Yep.
face, paraphrase and test, ask again, back off to move forward, and check in.
Yes. Yeah. So those are the seven kind of very concrete, tangible, learnable strategies for listening to learn.
Let's go to the last one here. So, again, to recap, choose curiosity, make it safe, pose quality questions, listen to learn. 5 is reflect and reconnect. How do we turn talk into action?
Yeah. So this one's my favorite. I happen to be kind of a junkie for learning. And reflection is how we learn. And I think reflection sometimes gets a bad rap. People think, oh, it's kind of, I don't have time for that, or it's a little mysterious, or I'd have to go meditate for 3 days before I can reflect. But reflection is just really processing what you heard. And that is how we actually turn talk into insight and insight into action. And so I just introduce a very simple method for doing that I call sift it and turn it. So sift it is just to say, if the other person told you 30 things, maybe you've jotted them down in your notes, maybe you remember them, they're probably not all equally important for you to focus on. So of those 30 or of those 10 or 15, what are the 2 or 3 nuggets that matter most? So you're going to sift out the other stuff. And sometimes it's important to sift out stuff that's like unhealthy for you to take in as well. So sift it to get it down to those couple of most important nuggets. And by the way, sometimes it's important to sift it with a friend or a coach or a mentor or colleague so that you don't accidentally sift out something important. They can help you do that. And then turn it just means turn it over in your mind 3 times. So the first time you turn it over in your mind, just say, how does this help me look at things differently? Maybe I learned something new about them. Maybe I see that there's a different aspect of the situation I wasn't considering, whatever it is. You're essentially turning it over to see if you want to revise your story about the situation. The second turn is to say, what steps should I take? So maybe now that I know this, I want to double down or I want to make a right turn or apologize or go faster, whatever it may be, but make sure you get to some actionable steps. And then the third turn is kind of going back to what I said at the beginning, looking back at your stuff. Maybe what they said reveals something to you about an assumption you have that's a little off, or some way that you're kind of like biased in the way you're looking at something, or some way, a pattern or habit you have is not serving you. And so ask yourself, is there anything in my stuff that this sheds a little light on? So sift it and turn it for your story, for your steps, for your stuff. And then I call it reflect and reconnect, because the reconnect really matters. This is not just about me extracting something from you and walking away.
Mm.
This is actually a mutual thing. So the reconnect is basically closing the loop. It's going back to the other person and saying, hey, so I've been thinking about our conversation. Here's what it makes me think about. Here's what I kind of took away from it. Here's what I'm going to do about that. By the way, how does that match up to what you were hoping I would take away from the conversation? Um, that there's a chance to get some correction if you got the wrong thing. And also, by the way, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. And if it felt at all risky or hard, thanks for taking the risk. That shows them that they didn't waste their time, that it was really worth it. Um, and I think it really increases the chances they're going to want to continue to share so you can learn together beyond that one interaction.
I like the idea of closing the loop. You know, it's instead of just having this conversation, let it float. There's no real end to the movie per se. And so, if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm kind of
Yeah,
playing your game here, paraphrasing
that's right.
what I'm hearing from you is it's let's close this loop, let's close this conversation, and let's make sure we're on the same page. So it wasn't just a one time back and forth. Is that what I'm getting there?
Yeah. First of all, beautiful example of paraphrase and check. So listeners should go back and use that as a model. But yeah, absolutely. It's and it's not just kind of bringing closure, like good talk, see ya, but more like here's what I got from you. Here's what I learned. Did I get that right? And thank you, and all of that kind of thing. So it's kind of a mutual closure, but a closure that is really around how did I learn from you? And if it went both ways, it invites them to do the same on their end too.
Well, I learned a ton from you today. This was awesome. Two guys that I think could nerd out about
We
curiosity
totally
and
could.
asking questions for hours and hours. I like to end my
Yeah.
podcast, Jeff, with a call to action. So for folks out there who are kind of closing this episode down here and they love this, they want to get curious, they want to ask questions, and they want to really take this out into real life. What's the call to action? What's one thing, if we were to boil it down? There's so much in this book and there's so much in this conversation. What would be one thing that they should go do tonight?
Yeah, I would say find someone in your life who you may not be fully connecting with. So if you're a parent or a coach, maybe that's the athlete that you're having a little harder trouble, challenge with. Maybe if you are a citizen, it's that person who's got the political sign that you disagree with. Or if you're sitting on a school board, somebody who's voted differently than you, whoever it is, think about one person and ask yourself, what can I learn from them? What's something that they could teach me, which doesn't mean you have to agree with them or do what they say. Just bring that level of curiosity. What can I learn from them? And then try to go ask them.
Everybody has something to teach us. It's just up to us whether we're open-minded enough to listen.
Yes, exactly.
Jeff,
Exactly.
this has been awesome. How can my listeners best support you?
Oh, well, they thank you. One is get the book. Ask. It is available anywhere books are sold. Two is check out the website. On the website, there's an ask assessment, so you can figure out which of these 5 steps you're really good at, which ones you need to grow at. And there's lots of other resources and videos and all kinds of things, articles. That's www.askapproach.com. And then, I love to connect with people on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, just check me out, connect with me, Jeff Wetzler.
Jeff, thanks a lot, man.
Awesome. Great to chat with you. Talk to you soon.